Hello and welcome to Tattvadeep, Conversations and Explorations. For our 8th episode on physics, we sat down with Professor Lawrence Krauss. Professor Krauss is an internationally known theoretical physicist, best-selling author, and acclaimed lecturer. His research interests have focused on the interface between elementary particle physics and cosmology, including the origin and evolution of the universe and the fundamental structure of matter. Among his numerous important scientific contributions was the proposal he made in 1995 that most of the energy of the universe resided in empty space. He's currently president of the Origins Project Foundation, which celebrates science and culture by connecting scientists, artists, writers, and celebrities with the public through special events, online discussions, and unique travel opportunities. The foundation produces the Origins podcast, a video podcast he hosts involving dialogues with the most interesting people in the world, discussing issues that address the global challenges of 21st century. Professor Krauss is the author of 10 acclaimed popular books, including Fear of Physics, The Physics of Star Trek, The Physics of Climate Control, and the yet unpublished The Known Unknowns, Unsolved Mysteries of the Cosmos. My conversation with Professor Krauss focused mostly on his approach to physics. We talked about what physics means to him and what he finds compelling about the subject. He also talked about his approach towards compiling a good question, failing effectively, and being open-minded. And even though we couldn't finish the interview because of time, I think we managed to draw some important insights that the listener will find useful. We hope this conversation can help the listeners see the tattva, or true essence of physics, and the important role it plays in helping us understand the world we live in and appreciate the fundamental forces that lie underneath everything. Hello, Professor Krauss. Welcome to Tattvadeep.
It's great to be here. You may hear my dog bark, but he's okay. Okay, it's great to be with you and far across the world, but it's nice to be with you virtually.
I'm very happy to be with you. And so we'll just get right into it. I know you don't have a lot of time. So this conversation is a part of an ongoing series on physics. So there are a couple of questions that I'm asking all physicists and philosophers of physics. So this first question is a common one.
Okay.
How would you define physics and your own approach to the subject?
Oh, okay. That's a big one. Well, physics is basically the fundamental study of the dynamics of how events occur and the laws that produce those dynamics at all scales in the universe, from the small scale to the largest scale. So in that sense, it's of course subsumes chemistry and biology, which depend on the laws of physics to understand dynamics on different scales. But the fundamental dynamics and the laws governing them are what physics is all about. And that has lately, on the most fundamental scales, that's become an effort to try and understand what symmetries govern the mathematical equations that describe the world. And maybe we can talk about that. My own approach varies. It depends. I try to stay closely coupled to experiment in one way or another. That hasn't been true for all my work, but I try to think about things that can be measured or the implications of measurements. So if you look at my history of my work, and I have many different papers, some of it is based on surprising or important experimental results and interpreting them in terms of fundamental laws, and perhaps using them to probe for new fundamental laws of physics. And another part has been aimed at proposing experiments that could be used to test the fundamental laws of physics. Mm-hmm. And then some subset of my work has been, and that includes observations from cosmology as well as experiments here on Earth. That's how I, as a particle physicist, got into cosmology, because I thought the universe is a wonderful laboratory to test the ideas of particle physics. Mm-hmm. And the final bit of work, or the most esoteric parts of my work, have been looking at those fundamental laws and trying to understand the implications of those in a general way. So there's three-pronged approach of my own research.
Sure. And the kind of questions I think that I've prepared will help us get into your approach even a little deeper. Well, let's see. So I've spoken to, say, about 6, 7 physicists so far, and we've spoken also to mathematicians and linguists. And one thing all of them that they find, that I found common in how they describe their experience with the subject, was they found it compelling. They found it beautiful. They found it moving too. And these were not the words I associated with, or when growing up in school with maths or physics. These were subjects to be scared of, right? And I'm not the only one feeling that, I'm sure. But what about you? What would you say you find most compelling and beautiful about physics?
Well, I think what happens is that fortune favors the prepared mind, and I think if your mind is properly prepared, you'd see things as beautiful. You just have to be prepared, and that's one of the reasons why I spend a lot of my time trying to explain the laws of physics so that other people can understand why they're beautiful, even though while on the surface they may not seem that way.
Mm.
I think that for me, the most remarkable aspect of physics, which I guess is also the most beautiful, is the fact that there are mathematical symmetries um, that seem to govern the fundamental laws of physics, and those symmetries are remarkable. They imply that when we change the description of nature in certain ways, the laws of physics remain the same. The simplest one is that the laws of physics is the same from point to point. So the laws of physics here is the same as laws of physics there. That's very important. Otherwise, you'd have to take a different physics class everywhere you were in school, and that'd be awful for everyone. But that's the simplest one. But it's become much more profound and detailed. And I think the fact that search for fundamental laws has, in some sense, become a search for new symmetries of nature, which is really mathematical, is remarkable and perhaps surprising. Uh, uh, but at least for me that's what probes the when I think of what is it about physics that probes the fundamental aspects of reality. It's searching for those symmetries of nature.
And I had a different question prepared here, but I think this question kind of is jumping at me right now.
Okay, okay, wherever you want to go is fine.
Okay, great. So,
We'll go wherever you want to go. Okay.
okay, okay. So now what I want to know is this understanding of yours and this desire to look through physics into the world that way, into the universe that way. How would you say that has impacted your own worldview, your own life, if I can ask you that, like your own personal life? In what way?
Oh, well, in many, many ways. I mean, it's made me feel insignificant in the sense of the cosmos, and I think that is a good thing and not a bad thing. Um, I look at the universe and realize how fortunate I am
Mm.
in this remote planet in the middle of a remote speck in the middle of a galaxy that's in the middle of nowhere, that somehow we have evolved to be able to be conscious of the universe and be able to understand it is remarkable. And even in time, the
Mm.
fact that it would have been impossible probably for me to exist 10 billion years ago before the light elements that built up the earth were
Yeah.
produced in stars. So
Yeah.
I guess I feel fortunate
Mm.
by my own existence, and it makes life more precious. It also, of course, the other aspect of my worldview is it's made me, more clearly than ever realize that there's no design or intelligence behind the universe as far as I can see, and that means that it really is a fortunate coincidence that you and I are chatting,
Mm.
and that we're here to be able to do it,
Mm.
and that I'm here, and I therefore think that every moment is more precious. I think it's more precious because there's no afterlife, or and it's just a remarkable experience, and I try and experience the world as much as I can in my time here on Earth.
Right. So, like in some sense, what I hear is, apart from this fascination that you experience, there's also a sense of gratitude and humility in how you put what you just said. So, would you then say that the universe in some way was designed for you in your own personal experience for you to come to this realization that these are actually like tools that can be used, taken advantage of in life to make it better, to make your life simpler, and just to be maybe a decent, good person?
Well, there's an old saying from I think David Hume that you can't get aught from is, but
Hmm.
I do think you have to know what is in order to know what's ought. So
Hmm.
what science tells us is how the world works, and I think that's the basis for living a good life because you can't make reasonable decisions about your own life or science policy more generally if you don't know what the implications are of what you're going to do. And so the more realistic you are about the way the world is and what the implications are of your actions, it seems to me the more rational your actions can be. I think also the fact I think science unifies us in a way that nothing else does. Certainly not religion, because I recognize that all of us are here. All humans are here when we're a subset of animals uh, by the same cosmic set of accidents, and I feel a kinship in that sense with everything that's alive on Earth. And I think I feel that more because my understanding of science. And so I also think some people say scientists are not humble enough, but I think that it's surely much less humble to not think the universe is made for me than it is to
Hmm.
assume that it is. So,
Hmm.
uh, but I think that science really empirical science, the process of science, which is empirical testing, and then rational reasoning based on those testing and then retesting, is a wonderful basis for life in general.
So would you say that now that you've accepted and understood and experienced that universe is not made for you, but would you say you've also come to the conclusion that maybe you're made for the universe?
Well, I don't know whether I would say I'm made for the universe. What's clear is that I couldn't is that everything about me arose because the universe allowed it to, and namely that the laws of physics that I discover and the laws of chemistry allow only certain possibilities for life and the fact that chemistry allowed life to happen is remarkable. So in some sense, if the universe were different, I wouldn't be here.
Right.
But that's not to say there might not be another intelligent being that would wonder why that universe looks so beautifully set up for him or her or it or them or
Good.
whatever pronoun you want.
Good, good, good. That's good. So, in order to research for this
Yeah.
conversation, I went through a couple of your interviews, and I think one of I watched your interview with Dr. Jordan Peterson, and in that, in the beginning, you said
Uh-huh.
something like this. You said that that a lot of people don't realize that scientists really like to be wrong, and personally, what they do is ask a different question, but in the process of science it's exciting to be wrong. Essentially you're saying that scientists like to be wrong. Now in the same interview you also go and say that by being open to being wrong one learns something. This is one of your, it seems, your lessons in life that you've picked up,
Sure,
that
and I
when you're,
think it would be great if more people.
that's
Sorry,
what
go on.
that's exactly what I want to get to, because I think sometimes people, in my life what I've experienced is I would not like something often when I do not know how to do it. It could even begin with not knowing how to even articulate it to myself, and we'll come to that as well. But in the spirit of this quote that you've given, that when you're open to being wrong you learn something, um, would you say that learning itself could be the greatest ideal we have, we should have, we could have as a race? And then, of course, there's that another question of the decision to be made, what you want to learn. And second is, for many people, accepting that, like I said, that they're wrong about something can be difficult. So, why do you think that would be so? And can you share some tips and insights you might have gathered over the years in your process of learning that being wrong is good?
Well, there's a lot of questions there to unpack. The I think that it would be better for more people. There's certainly I really advise teachers and parents to certainly be willing to be wrong, but more importantly to say that they don't know the answer. Um,
Mm.
and um, and 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 every time you're wrong about the universe, it's an opportunity, as you say, to learn. And it's an opportunity to discover, it's really an opportunity for wonder instead of embarrassment. And I think the reason people are hesitant, don't like being wrong, is that the people around them put some judgment. That if you're on stage, it's embarrassing to say something that's wrong. If you're a politician, it might be, but changing your mind is really the most liberating experience that humans can have. And you can't learn without changing your mind because we don't know everything
Mm.
when we're young or even at any time. And therefore it's being willing to be wrong is the same as also being willing to listen to others,
Mhm.
including others whose ideas you desperately disagree with,
Mhm.
or you think you desperately disagree with. The fact that Jordan Peterson and I can have a conversation, and even though that I know we disagree about certain key things, is important because we're willing to potentially learn from each other. And
Mm.
part of the problem now, it seems to me, in modern education is that people aren't willing to, not only aren't they willing to listen to people
Mm.
with whom they disagree,
Mm.
but they don't even want those people to be able to talk.
Yeah. So
My dogs agree with that. Okay.
well, good for them. So now,
Yeah.
like, I'm sure in your own life, as a physicist, as just an individual, roaming the planet, there must have been times when this lesson would have come to you that there's no turning away from it. I don't know if you were born with this. Some people seem to be born with it, to be open-minded and say, okay, I'd like to learn. But for others, it doesn't come easy. So I do not know which category you fall in. But say you fall in the latter category, where you had to go through some painful experiences to understand that, yeah, to be open-minded means to learn. What shift was required within you? Do you have any of those practical tips to give?
Well, one of the things that really had an impact on me was reading books about scientists and by scientists.
Mhm.
When I was 10 or 11, I read a book about Galileo.
Mm.
And that had a profound influence because, of course, Galileo was able to show that we were wrong
Yeah.
about, the way the Earth and the sun, and also wrong about motion, and for which he was punished, and he was brave, and I kind of all of those things I thought were noble, and so I saw, for me, that the enterprise of science became something very courageous,
Mhm.
but also liberating because it was clearly what he did was push the limits of our minds and beyond the imaginations that people had before. And I guess for me, that really created a prototype of what I thought science was all about. And
Mhm.
so that's why I write books. And I think one of the ways that people can experience that if they haven't had it before is reading books by scientists about science, and every now and then you have this aha experience and you can see you're pushing your own limits, or go to school. Obviously, I think if the school is any good, it'll push your limits, it'll make you uncomfortable,
Mm.
and being uncomfortable is part of learning. And most people think it's a bad thing, but it's actually a good thing.
Right. And now when I'm looking at these questions that I've designed, they're really trying to get into how you approach things as you do, because I think there's a lot to benefit from it because you've applied that in your life, and it's clear, it's that's clear. And so in the same interview,
Let me interrupt you for a second. Mostly I just want to have fun.
that's the best. That's the best thing to do in life anyway, right? To learn, to
Yeah,
not
yeah, no, and
forget,
for me,
to not forget that.
yeah. And
And
that's learning can be fun. And the minute you realize learning can be fun and discovery can be fun, then it becomes addictive.
yes, being wrong can be fun, and there's always more road to travel. Yeah, I agree with
Yeah.
that.
Generally, so a lot of people think scientists work on what they do so they can save the world, and most of the time, all the time, anyone who's any good at it is good at it because they find it fun.
Right, and you'll see that people have created these images of scientists because of I do not know what, but it seems that that image was set, and it seems to be breaking now. And a different kind of a scientist, open-minded, willing to be wrong, and vulnerable, maybe he's coming out, breaking through the surface. So yeah, maybe that
The
image is
biggest danger
changing.
to the biggest danger to our society is not, in my mind, is not. I mean, I've argued against religion, and you are out of focus now. I'm out of focus, but I'll come back into focus. There I am.
Yep.
Um, is a new secular religious view of being certain of the answers, being certain about what's right, and
Mm,
not allowing anyone else to speak, or and if they
mm,
do, getting offended and somehow feeling like a victim.
mm,
That kind of religiosity of being certain you're right before you even ask the questions, or before you even listen to the possibility of that you're wrong,
mm.
is the biggest threat to education, the biggest threat to society in general, whether it comes from religion or secular ideology.
Right. And see, one of this is pure bad attitude. I cannot be wrong and I do not want to know. Okay, let's leave that bit aside. Then I remember talking to a philosopher of physics on the podcast only, and we got talking about uncertainty and all of that. There are
Mhm.
certain people who, a lot of us who are afraid of being uncertain, because then the rug gets pulled from under your feet. Then what do you stand on? Because you don't seem to have anything else to stand on.
Yeah.
So to not want to be wrong seems to make survival sense.
Well, it's even worse. Uncertainty. You hit the key word there. For many people in our society, the word uncertainty is a negative. It's a pejorative concept. In science, uncertainty is a positive concept because nothing is known with absolute certainty.
Mm.
And science is the only area of human activity where we can quantify our uncertainty. We can acknowledge it exists,
Mm.
which is important, and some people in other realms of life don't acknowledge that it exists. We can acknowledge that it exists, and we can quantify it. So we can say we can make this statement with this amount of certainty. Never 100%.
Mm.
You try and get as close as you can. And so uncertainty is the hallmark of science. And it's what makes science great, not what makes science weak.
Right. Very interesting. So now going back to another quote from the same interview with that you had, you also said that often I realize what we don't do well enough for students is to teach them how to fail effectively. And we are in that zone of being wrong, uncertain, overcoming your fear, being open to being afraid. So now what I want to ask you is, sorry, you continue. You said we give them problem sets that they're guaranteed to have, that are guaranteed to have direct answers. We even give them PhDs where they're more or less guaranteed to come up to a solution. But in the real world of research and business and many other things, you may find you have to learn the fact that the question I was asking was really not a good question. So now you've been, at some point in your life, you were a student, and a good teacher continues to be a student forever. I totally understand that. But now you're also a professor, you're a public speaker. What would you say constitutes a good question? And if you could also share with us your own approach towards making a question good or making a good question.
Well, oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. um,
Okay.
the the I think a good question is one which can be tested for where you can. A good question is one, first of all, that one that's based on some sound reasoning of things you think you understand
Mm.
and pushes beyond the boundary in a way that is that can be resolved with some with that's likely to be resolvable. I
Mm.
mean, there are fundamental questions that we'll never be able to answer, but a good question, if you're thinking as a scientist and maybe as a someone trying to be productive in your job, a good question is what can push what I know just a little bit farther.
Mm.
So the question, and then how can I go about answering that question? And so, as I say, sometimes you think it's a good question, but you find out it wasn't after you go beyond, and then you've got to be willing to say that wasn't a good question because it really doesn't relate to what I'm trying to do, or it isn't solvable, and I should move on instead of spending your whole life trying to answer a question that it's unanswerable. It might be better to move on. So I think one that's based on evidence, based on reasoning, and
Mm.
that pushes it further, and that can be resolved by some process, or at least addressed.
Mm.
Knowing at least it provides an algorithm. A good question provides an algorithm for you to try and search the answer. For the
Right.
answer, there's a clear method, and then you could take step by step to try and figure out whether that method resolves the question or shows that the question is not a good question.
Beautiful. So I watched
Thank you.
your I watched your conversation with Mr. Noam Chomsky, and it was so amazing. Clearly, you had prepared, you'd given it everything, and it was someone you, because you were talking to someone you looked up to, and we'll come to that as well. But those are the things I really want to know. So when you were preparing for that, you said you'd set out to read 5 of his books in a week.
Yeah.
So even at your level of, let's say, the mental acumen, let's say, you've achieved, It's hard work. It takes time. It's a thing of effort and maintenance. I totally understand that. And you put yourself out there that, okay, I'm talking to someone and I'd like to make the most of this conversation, which is in fact my goal here with you.
Okay.
Because I know my
Yeah.
parameters. I know you don't have a lot of time. So I need to draw as much out of this as I can. And where you and I can meet is not on physics. I don't know zero about nothing. Forget that. So
Yeah.
what we can talk is in terms of ideas, so and there we can connect, and there's a lot that I can draw from, take advantage of your experiences, maybe not make certain mistakes I might make if I don't have that information. So anyway, so like when you look back at that conversation of yours with Mr. Noam Chomsky, when you look back, do you judge, for the lack of a better word, your questions? Do you say, okay, I could have asked this better, I didn't need not have asked that, I already knew the answer, or I did certain things because maybe the audience does not know? So do you have that kind of approach in your own mind? Like, what makes a good question in Lawrence Krauss's head?
Oh, when I have these spontaneous conversations, they're always choreographed in my mind. I mean, they don't always go where I want to go or where I
Yes.
thought I wanted to go.
Mm.
But my goal is to always help illuminate the ideas that the person I'm talking to has. And that means sometimes asking questions that I know the answer to so that it will provide the answers for the audience. And sometimes finding ways to encourage someone to speak about things in a new way. So in order to do that, I have to know where people are coming from, the
Mm.
person I'm talking to. I have to have immersed myself in their ideas, and that's why you'd have to do your homework, whether you're a
Mm.
student or a professor or whatever. So I try to do my homework, and that allows me to better push and prod someone, sometimes pushing them on things they've said that maybe you think need to be further illuminated, and sometimes pushing them to clearly say things that you know they can say, but the audience hasn't heard.
Mm.
Okay, so it's a combination of things. So on the good dialogues I've had that go that way, I really try and base it on a lot of preparation. And I should also say that in that dialogue with Noam and many others I have, we usually get through about between 10 and 25% of the material that I was prepared to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I understand. I understand. And now, just to see if you can walk down the memory lane a bit, do you think you are? I'm sure there are some awesome questions in your future that you're going to ask, and your mind will be blown by the answers that will come your way. But so far, would you say that these three questions, or this one question, is the best question that ever occurred to me because for X, Y, Z, whatever reason?
Well, I try not to be hierarchical. I try never to think of best. There are lots of things I like, but everyone always says, "What's your favorite? This? What's the best one?" Just not the way I think. But 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 the question that satisfies me most about the world that I somehow was able to ask is it possible that this crazy that a certain crazy idea about nature could actually be right, and that idea was that uh, that empty space could have energy,
Right.
and it was based not on just saying, well, mate, is it a crazy idea that could be right, but more importantly, I studied carefully the data from cosmology, and it wasn't adding up. It wasn't holding up. And I guess the question, so that you can ask, why is it not holding up? And the best question I guess I asked is, could it not be holding up because of could that be evidence for this absolutely insane possibility?
Mm.
And I was certain, by the way, that so I asked that question and showed that it was consistent with that possibility, but but I didn't do it to prove that possibility was right. I thought the possibility was so crazy that some of the experiments might be wrong. So I really proposed this to say, look, this in order for all of the data to agree, you have to have this crazy possibility, but the possibility is so crazy that some of the data must be wrong. And then it turned out the data was right and the possibility was right. So, but that was probably the question that I'm probably most satisfied asking about nature because it led to something profound in a way.
Right. Yeah, there are a lot of interesting things. So yeah, it led to something profound. So you remember it as that. It was a breakthrough
Well, yeah, I mean, it,
seeming.
it changed the way we think about the universe. Now, my asking it didn't necessarily change the way we think about it, but I was right. And then in order to demonstrate it, experimentalists had to demonstrate that this crazy idea was right, and and it turns out they did, and they won the Nobel Prize for that discovery.
Wow. Okay, that's nice. And in your conversation, in your introduction to the conversation with Mr. Chomsky, you said there are only two people you look up to, and they are Mr. Chomsky and Mr. Richard, late Mr. Richard Feynman. Now, what about these two
It's
individuals?
probably
Yeah.
not true. I think I look up to other people.
Okay, you can tell me
What about those two individuals? Well, there's a lot of people I look up to in my life, but those two stand out certainly,
Mhm.
and I think for lots of different reasons. I think they stand out because I always admire people who can do things that I not that only that I can't do, but I don't think I could do. I mean, I think there's a lot of things if I worked hard at I could do, but I don't. But and also the intellectual integrity. I think that's really for me the greatest um, what I admire most about those two people is their intellectual integrity, the
What is
fact that
that?
they're willing to
Yeah.
well, the fact that they're willing to speak out about speak out against things that are wrong, that are known to be wrong, and be willing to explore things, um, even if they're unpopular, and also being willing to work very very hard to try and understand things. Um, I think I think, and also the fact that both of them worked very hard to explain things to the public. And I admire I admired the style of Richard Feynman, and it affected greatly my own way I talk and maybe even think about physics. And I
Right.
admired Chomsky because he was willing to speak out and also open to people around him. As I think I said in that interview, I was struck by when I used to attend his public
Yeah,
events
yeah.
when I was a student in Boston, that he would stay as long as necessary to answer every single question, even after the audience had dispersed. And I
Mm.
found that generosity of spirit something that I tried to emulate when I have my own public events.
Right. So, okay, shifting gears a little bit. So, as a non-experts on these subjects that we are daring to go and talk to experts about, trying to meet on the common ground of ideas, we
Okay.
don't end up going to scientific papers. We don't go to, we go to YouTube videos where you guys are breaking things down in a simple way for a lot of people to understand. And I also go to films, right? So,
Mhm.
what I want to know is that, and today in 2022, let's say, it's quite common to see scientists like yourself coming out in the open and talking about physics. It's not just limited to people in a university, and things are happening, and little bits pieces here and there go down to the public in terms of knowledge. But people are coming out, and we're getting to hear about, say, physics, for example, from the horse's mouth, so to speak. But earlier there were some examples where so scientists are becoming a part of these outreach program. But before this happened, TV shows, TV news, films, they were the main sources from which common men could get a peephole view into the closed world of science. Now I want to ask you, what kind of job would you say these sources of information and entertainment have done on putting physics out there? And what are some of the deep rooted ideas that scientists like yourself are burdened to fix in the public consciousness because of how they were represented by TV or films?
Well, I wrote a book called The Physics of Star Trek,
Star
right?
Trek, yeah.
Yeah, and what those kind of things do is excite people's imaginations.
Mm.
I generally think TV, the fiction gets science generally wrong, but that's okay
Mm.
if it gets people excited about the questions.
Mm.
Okay, and then people like me can give them help them work their way through the answers.
Mm.
So I think that those modes they excite people because they go to where people are. They're fascinated by science fiction or music or something else, and and that gets that you can't be interested. You can't learn something unless you're interested,
Yeah.
and so they what that does is spark people's interests,
Right.
and then it's up to people like me to try and steer people in the right direction after that.
So
Which is why I
essentially,
wrote the physics of Star Trek.
yeah. So essentially, you don't have any problem because definitely, as writers, they take creative leaps and put certain ideas out there that might be scientifically
Well,
inaccurate. Yeah.
sometimes I have problems, usually because the plot is bad. But sometimes it's so stupid that I get upset. But what really gets me upset is when people pretend what they're talking about when they don't know what they're talking about is real.
Uh-huh.
So as long as you throw it out as fiction and but when people give an explanation of something that they act as if it's the correct explanation and they don't have the slightest idea what they're talking about, then it's frustrating for me. I try never to do it. Maybe I do it every now and then, but I try not to.
Okay.
My conversation with Professor Krauss shed light on what makes science a discipline of wonder, beauty, and a great tool for organizing the mind. We hope to sit down with him in the future and get a better grip on some of the practical tools and tips he applies to make the most of his scientific observations and articulations. It will be wonderful to know your thoughts on the interview, and if it inspired your worldview in any way. Thank you for being here. I will see you soon with another interesting mind, demystifying another interesting topic. Until then, take care.